Howdy, folks. Let me get rid of this and show you my face. Once again, I am Rosendo from MLH. You saw me earlier during the opening ceremony, and right now we've got a really special treat for y'all. We have developer advocate from Auth0, Sierra Ford, joining us to let y'all know how to implement authentication in your React app with Auth0. So we've got some really great content in store for you today. Make sure that you are registered and checked in. The link is right there, GHW Cloud 24 Auth0 workshop. It's pretty self explanatory. I know some of y'all folks are coming from the DFANG workshop that just wrapped up, but we're going to go ahead and switch gears and get into some authentication and authorization and things of that nature. So, without any further ado, I hope y'all are excited. Make sure you drop your questions in chat. Make sure you're engaging in chat because I'm going to be keeping track of everyone that's asking any questions and then getting them over to Ciora for y'all. Without any further ado, I'll go ahead and bring Ciora up to the stage. How's it going, Ciora?
Hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I just as a heads up, if you see me looking between two different screens, I have two different monitors. So my slides and my code is on this one ahead of me, and the chat and everything is on this side. So just to avoid confusion if I'm like looking around. But yes, let's get into it. Today I'm going to be discussing with you guys authentication in React with Auth0. Before we jump into the content, I do want to give a little bit of an introduction to myself. So Rosenda explained, I'm a developer advocate at Auth0. I am also a React developer based out of Philadelphia, born and raised. I've been in the tech industry for about 4 years, and I'm really passionate about educating developers, new, some who are a little bit later on into their careers like I am. And even if sometimes, even though if you don't have a bunch of experience, you can still teach the senior folks some things. So I try to do that with the talks and workshops that I give at different conferences and hackathons and events like this. I just also want to shout out that if you have any questions now or even later, you can reach out to me at LinkedIn. Just search my name, Sierra Ford, or on Twitter/X if you want to call it that. And my username there is Ceoreo. That's CEEOREO_. If you have any questions about the work that I'm doing, about Auth0, about identity security specifically, or React, I'm happy to be of assistance there. So yeah, let's get into the content. So I just want to give a quick overview of the run of show for this workshop. We're going to first cover some more informational content. This is where you get to just listen to me talk a little bit. You can take notes if you want, but it won't require any like extra work from you for the most part. Excuse me. But we will be covering the basics of auth. So when we say auth, we're talking about authentication and authorization, which are two different things. So we'll talk about what those things are. We'll talk about building your own authentication and authorization system and how it can be done, and the pitfalls of building your own auth as well, because there are some, as is the case when you build things yourself. Human error can come into play, especially when we're talking about identity security. And then we're going to talk about using Auth0 for auth. That should say auth, not auth. I don't know how that happened. Note to self, change that later. But yeah, and then once we start talking about Auth0, that's when we'll actually do some coding. We'll be interacting with the Auth0 React SDK and all that kind of good stuff. And you guys will get to get your hands dirty with some code as well. So yeah, I'm excited about getting to that part, even though I'm not going to lie, I get a little nervous when I have to live code, but I think this will go pretty well. So let's hop into it. I do want to just check and make sure there are no comments that I'm missing. Yes, you can use Auth0 with Next.js. I can talk about that a little bit later as well. I actually use Next.js now more than I use React. So building out this workshop or returning to this workshop, because I've given it before, was a little bit like, for me, because I've been so used to using Next.js, which is very similar to React, but also very different, that I had to like switch gears. But anyway, let's get into it. Let's get back to the content. What are the key parts of a React application? So when you're building something, if you're like working in a hackathon, or if you're just building something on your own time, or even if you join a company and you're a part of a team, you guys are building a new application, what are some of the key features that you think to add? You can add some comments yourself in the chat if you want about what you think should be an integral part of a React application. But some things that came to mind for me were it really obviously depends on the functionality of the app. So like a e-commerce app built with React will be different from a SaaS app built with React. But there are some things that you kind of expect when you go to a React application. You expect to have like functional navigation and functional routing. So when you're switching between pages or clicking links within the page, you want that to be done smoothly. You want optimal loading speed, excuse me, for pictures, for videos, for content on the page. These are some of the things that you just automatically expect. And of course, like I said, it's going to be different depending on the functionality of the app. So some apps you might want good search, like a good search engine. If you're, like I said, an e-commerce site, you want to search for specific products. For a gaming site, you would probably want something that's very robust and that's going to serve up your. Do people make games with React? I don't really know. I've never built a game before, but like it's going to depend on the functionality of the app. But one thing that you probably will almost always want with the React application is safe and secure login and logout. And I want to add like an emphasis on safe and secure because when we're talking about logging in and logging out, think about the times you've had to do that with an application. A lot of times you're putting in personal information, your name, your email address, and then when you actually interact with the application, depending on, again, the functionality, maybe you have to put some payment information in there or other personal information. And so it's really important that login and logout specifically are very safe and secure because so much vulnerable information is being held in an application through that process. So let's take a closer look at what happens when you're logging in and logging out. If we're thinking about it like from a user perspective, it's such a quick process most of the time that we don't think twice about it. But on the engineering side, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So let's kind of get into that because again, we're trying to put on that engineering hat today and look at it from that perspective. So yeah, let's define some terms, some key terminology. So logging in and logging out is a part of this thing that we call identity access management. It's not the only part of it, but it is a very key part of it. And let's kind of get into what identity access management actually is. So before I do that, I'm just going to check the chat one more time because I don't want to miss anything. You can use Auth0 with Python. The way Auth0 works with Python is a little bit different, which I'll get into in a little bit. But just as a quick, rundown, Python is normally used as a backend language. And when you're using backend languages, a lot of times you're building APIs and things like that. APIs, you want protected, you want certain parts of the API, certain information in the API to be protected. And that's where this thing called authorization comes in. If you remember at the beginning, we're talking about authentication with React. So with Python, if you're using Auth0 with Python, you're normally going to be doing authorization stuff, which we're not really touching on today, but it is possible to use Auth0 with Python. And yes, routing is super important for SaaS and e-commerce applications, which you're the same person who mentioned Next.js. That's why I like using Next.js because it makes routing very simple and straightforward. But yes, let's get back to the content at hand. So, right, what is identity access management? This is a term that sometimes you can hear thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean? It's just the process of making sure the right people access the right digital resources at the right time for the right reasons. So again, there's a lot that goes into this, but that's like the simple definition for what IAM does, or identity access management actually controls and does. If we're thinking about like banking applications or anything that, especially things that have very sensitive information about like your address, or if you ever have to log into a government website and use your social security information, again, banking apps where you have to put in your banking information and all that, those kind of things. IAM is very, very important for those kinds of applications. IAM is honestly important for just about every application out there, but especially those that are dealing with some sensitive information, because there are people out there who want to have access to digital resources that they shouldn't have access to, at times where they shouldn't have access to it for the wrong reason. So earlier, we kind of touched on a little bit with authentication. You saw that in the title of this workshop. Also, I mentioned authorization with relation to Python. So let's kind of just define what these two things are. For the most part, this workshop will be talking about authentication specifically, but I still think it's good for you to know what both of these terms are, because sometimes they get thrown around a little bit. I kind of like, in computer science, we're not the best at naming things. And I do think authentication and authorization are the best names for these specific things, but they're so close to each other, it's easy to get them confused. So let's like set the record straight and define authentication and authorization, which are these two key parts of identity access management. So if we think about authentication is the process of determining a user is who they claim to be. So if we put this in like real life terms, non-digital, we're not talking about coding right now, just in real life, authentication happens all the time. If you go to the bank, if you go to anywhere where you have to like access specific information, or if you're trying to, I'm trying to think what else, like if you're trying to get your passport or whatever, you have to go to some office downtown where like they handle social security stuff or whatever. They're probably going to ask you, once you tell them who you are, they're probably going to ask you for your ID. And this ID is the way that they authenticate you. This is the way that they determine you are who you say you are. So if I go to the bank and I'm trying to access my sister's bank information, and I say, I'm such and such Ford. I don't want to put her name out there because I don't know if she would like that. But if I say that I'm my sister and then they ask for my ID and they see that I'm actually not her, they will know for a fact that I am not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to have access to her information. And they know that because they authenticated who I am, and they determined that this person is not who they're saying they are. So like I said, we do authentication all the time in real life, especially as adults. When you're doing anything like any kind of adulty thing, they're probably going to have to do some form of authentication. So now that we have authentication out the way, let's get into authorization. They're honestly very similar to each other. And a lot of times in the process of authorizing somebody, you also have to authenticate them. So the process, authorization specifically, is the process of determining what resources a user can access. So again, in real life terms, this is like a security guard guarding a door in a building and having to check and make sure that you are supposed to have access to that specific room in the building. Maybe you already came in and you authenticated and they know that you are who you say you are, but that doesn't automatically mean that you can, just because you are who you claim to be, it doesn't mean you can have access to every room in whatever building this is. Even if you go to like an office building, if you're going to your friend's job, you may be able to get in because they know you're not a fraud, but that doesn't mean you can have access to every room in the building. And so a similar thing happens when we're also talking about online resources or anything having to do with logging into a website, logging out of a website, and accessing certain information. One way that authorization comes up all the time, that happens a lot, but you may not even realize that it's authorization, is when, for instance, you are sharing information between two different applications. So my favorite example of this is, I really like music. I really like going to concerts. There are some apps that show you what concerts are happening in your area, and they can integrate with an app like Spotify or Apple Music to see what artists you're listening to and therefore determine what concerts you might be interested in. When you make this connection between the two, you have to authorize that Spotify can share your information with whatever app you're using to find the concerts. So you're allowing this application to have access to information. So there are times where you're allowing an entity, an organization, an application to have access to user information, or sometimes it's an actual person who's trying to have access to certain information. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the chat and I will try my best to answer them to the best of my ability. And like we said, identity access management is much bigger than just auth. There's so much that goes into it. Authentication and authorization involve a lot of different security protocols. There's a lot of different things you have to, outside of just authorization and authentication, you have to put a lot of protection in place for any kind of application that's handling personal information to make sure those things don't get leaked, don't get shared. And that is like a separate thing, but it's still a part of identity access management. So it's a really, really big, field of study, I guess you could say. It's a really big thing. But for right now, it's important that we just deal with auth. We're going to start small. And maybe after this, if you figure out that you're still interested, you can look more into identity access management, or you can reach out to me and I can give you some resources to learn more as well. So based off of what we just talked about, this is a time where you can like put your answers in the chat as well. Where does login and logout fit in when we're talking about authorization versus authentication? Is it authorization or is it authentication? What do you guys think? I'll give you guys a second to put some questions in, or put your answers in the chat. And I'm going to answer another question. Can we use Auth0 and Flutter? You can. I have never done that before. I've never worked with Flutter before, but Auth0 has SDKs available in a bunch of different languages and frameworks. You can check them out. Just well, later on in the workshop, we're going to go to auth0.com and make an account. But once you do that, you can check out all the different SDKs we have available for a bunch of different languages. But let me check. Okay, you guys are really smart. It is definitely authentication. Again, logging in and logging out is verifying a person is who they say they are. So that is the process of authenticating someone. So I have another question for you guys. I'm sorry I'm making you guys do so much work in the chat today. But has anyone here ever tried to build their own authentication? Please be honest. And I'll tell my own experience. I have. It was not fun. It was very difficult. And I'll kind of go into why the whole process it can be a lot right now. So just as a walkthrough, this is my experience with trying to build authentication on my own. You usually start out with building a form, because most login and log out is you inputting a user inputting information in a form. You also have to build an API that handles the information the user is giving you and also handles putting it where it needs to go. So if you want to store this somewhere, you're probably going to need a database. And now we're getting into like backend things. We just talked about APIs and databases, which I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but I'm a front-end developer. So having to interact with APIs and databases is like, I mean, not interact with APIs, building one, that's a lot for me. So you have to create a database, which is a whole other thing that is supposed to keyword securely hold this user information. Because a lot of times when people are creating an account, when they're logging in, they're also using a password, which is sensitive information. So we have to make sure that it's securely stored. We also have to configure cookies and sessions to keep users logged in, even when the page is refreshed or closed, which is a whole other thing. And then you have to create logout protocol, which is also it's not impossible, but it can get a little complicated. So because you don't want to fully delete the user when they like log out, but you still want to, it's a whole thing. And a lot of times people will use like open source things, packages and things like that to help with building authentication. But I strongly encourage you, just as a tip in general, when it comes to tech, before using a third-party service, just attempt to do something on your own, because then it'll prove why you actually need that thing. And so, like we've exemplified by listing off all the steps that you have to go through to build your own app, like authentication, it can be very complicated and also not very secure. And like we talked about, we're dealing with passwords, and these passwords are protecting personal sensitive information. And so it's really important that it is secure, but it's hard to do that when you're doing it on your own. And there are real consequences to building this auth on your own, because like we talked about, identity access management and just identity security in general are such huge fields. It's very hard for one person or even a team to learn enough about these things to build authentication in-house in a very safe and secure way. And we know this because of the statistic that I found from an official source. I can't remember the source, but I promise it's official. And it's not Auth0. It's from another entity that is like very objective. 79% of enterprises experience identity breaches. That is a very, very high number. So thinking about this, I'm assuming most of you guys are probably students still in school, but like the chances of you getting a job somewhere that has had an identity breach is very high. So it is something that you will have to like confront at some point, probably in your computer science career. So how can we prevent this or get this number to go lower? I'm going to take a sip of water because my voice is like already going out. Okay, so how can we get this number to go lower? How can we prevent these identity breaches? Because remember, we're not talking about like information that doesn't matter. We're talking about like names and addresses and email addresses and bank information, really important sensitive information. So what you can do is you can take the time to become an identity security expert and also bring other team members that you may be working with up to speed, which, as you can imagine, will take a long time because, like we said, this is a very serious thing that you probably need to be an expert in. Or you can use a third party service like Auth0. And the great thing about using a third party service like Auth0 is that you kind of leave the expertise to the developers on the Auth0 side. So you don't necessarily have to spend the time ramping up on identity security and identity access management and taking away from building the core functionality of your application. You can just kind of offshore that to someone else and use Auth0 or something else. I don't want it to seem like Auth0 is the only option because it's not, but I do work for Auth0, so I highly recommend it. And like I mentioned earlier, Auth0 has SDKs in a bunch of different languages, and we also not only do authentication, but authorization. Although we're mostly focusing on authentication today, authorization is also a part of the package. So let's get coding. Excuse me. I have to make sure that I have all of my code up to par. Before we even get into this, I just want to make sure, can everyone see my code pretty well, or should I blow up the font? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it okay. If you want me to make it bigger, I can do that. Everyone's good? Okay, perfect. So yeah, let's get coding. Right now, you can work with your own application, or you can work with the same one that I'm working with, which I will share in just a second. Before we get started with the actual code, let's make an Auth0 account. So let me see very quickly. I'm sorry, I had to get out of my slideshow. I'm going to, I'm going to go back for a second, and I'm going to go to auth0.com, and I'm going to log in because I already have an account. And so it does it automatically for me, but you guys will have to like go through the authentication process. You see what I did there? And make your account. And once you do that, this will be the dashboard that you see. So I'm going to switch my tenant. This is something you don't have to do, but I'm just doing that so that I can start fresh. So this is yes, I will make sure that you guys have access to the slides after the session is over for sure. But for now, we're going to create an application. So click this button. I've already created my application. So I'm going to go over to applications over here. And this is the really important part of everything. So when you're creating your application, I'll just go through it so you guys see what the process is like. You're going to have to choose which kind of application you're building. So remember earlier we said you can do some backend stuff, you can do full stack stuff. Right now we're just working with front end apps. So we're going to stick with React. I'll just put a 2 here so that there's a differentiator. And this is where it's going to take us. You can, let me slow down so I can make sure that, yes, of course, I can zoom in on the browser stuff. Is this better? Okay, I hope that's better. Let me know if you want me to zoom in a little bit more. But yes, this is where it's going to take you. You're going to just click on React. You don't really have to, but this is great because it shows you perfect. This shows you the steps that I'm going to be going through with you, but in written form. So if as I'm going, I'm moving too fast or you're like confused about something, I will just you can just reference this. So yes, at this point, you should have created your Auth0 account. And then we're going to move on to the next step. So yeah, we went through creating an application. Actually, I'm going to pull this out into a separate browser so that this can still be full screen. I hate seeing like the rest of the Google slide stuff when I'm supposed to be showing the slides. Anyway, so a next step is to open your React app in your text editor of choice. So you can, right now, you can watch along. You can work along with your own application, or you can use the same app that I'm working off of. And I will I can put the link to it in the chat. I think I'm not 100% sure if I can actually, but I will, or it's not a link. You'll have to git clone this application that I'm working with, the same starter that I'm working with. So let's see if I can get that in the chat. Can I get that in the chat? I'm not sure if I can. I might have to rely on Rosendo to do that. So I'll just leave that here so you guys have it. Just give me 1 second. And I'm also going to reorganize some of my tabs so that I can make sure we're all looking at the right things. I want to copy this too. Okay, okie dokie. Alrighty, so the git clone, the repo that I'm working with is, you can use that command to download that and work from the same thing as me. But as you can see, where am I? Here we are. This is the code that we'll be working with. I'll get us up and running so you can kind of get a quick tour of this application. So let me just quickly reorganize my tabs. So first and foremost, we're going to run npm install. This is specifically for the people who are working with the same project that I'm working with. And you want to do this so you can have all the proper dependencies. So I hope that this is big enough, guys. It's so, I'm learning as I do more of these workshops and virtual like presentations and things. The whole font thing is a big pain in the keister. Okay, so I'm just going to do npm install again to install all the correct dependencies, which I don't think I really had to do that again, but I did. It's fine. So right, we have that done. These are like whenever you're downloading, when you're cloning and working with a repo that is not yours, this is just the step that you should always do so you can make sure that you have the correct things installed, and then run your development server. So we're doing this because we want to be able to see what our application is going to look like, and we also want to keep an eye on the we want to see what port our server is running from, and this will be important later on. Very soon, not even that later. So I'm just going to do npm run start here. And, oh, actually, you know what? Let me kill this for a second because I actually need to make sure that this is running specifically from the server that I think it is. Give me one sec. Bear with me for 1 second. What else is running from that? What else is... Oh, I know what it is. It's this. Hold on. Give me a second, guys. I have code running in a different VS Code window that I had to kill. Okay, because we want it has to specifically be this port that I'm thinking it will be. So I'm going to run npm run start again. And as you can see, it's going to run from port 440. And if I go in my browser to localhost 4040, not 440, 4040. This is what our application looks like. And I'll zoom in a little bit more because I just saw that this is looking very small. I'll zoom in some more. I have an ultra wide monitor, you guys. I'm so sorry. Okay, so this is like a pretty basic React application. There's not a ton going on. We have some pages here. These are pages that we can't access just yet because we are not logged in. The pages that we'll be working with specifically as we are, the pages we'll be working with specifically as we're going through this workshop will be profile, and we're also going to be adding a login and logout button. So we have our server running. You know that we're running from, for us specifically, if you're working with the same repo as me, localhost 4040. It may be different for you. A lot of times, a lot of servers will run from localhost 3000. So yeah, it just depends. Okay, cool. So we're going to go back to our slides to see what our next step is. So This is a really important part. We're going to navigate to the settings in your application dashboard. And remember earlier, I was just saying that it's important for us to know what port our application is running from. That's because we have to specify in the Auth0 settings for our application the callback URLs, the logout user URLs, and the allowed web origins. And this is basically the link that people will go back to when they log in or when they log out. So I will not show you, I will, wait, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to make sure that this is as secure as possible because technically I don't want you to see everything in my settings. Can I like pause sharing this for a second? I'll remove from stage 4. I can't do that. Okay, I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll down a little bit because I don't want you to see everything in my settings for security reasons. As a person who works at an identity security company, I have to make sure that I'm like, you know, on my P's and Q's with this kind of stuff. So here I can show my screen again. There we go. Here's where if you scroll down in your settings, in your application settings, you'll see these fields, the allowed callback URLs, the allowed logout URLs, and the allowed web origins. And this is where you're going to put https://localhost 4040. And I'll just copy this, Command C, and put this here, and also put this here. And one thing to remember when you are, yes, the first command was npm install. I can give you guys a second. I know I'm moving kind of fast. I don't want to like rush through this. I've practiced this. Say that one more time. You said then we did run right. So you run npm install, and then after you run npm install, let's go back a little bit. You run your development server. So that for me, that is npm run start. Yes. Thank you, Shrud_2213. You run npm run start to start your development server. You should be doing this. You should be running this command in your terminal, and make sure that when you're running it in your terminal that you're actually in the correct folder. So the name of my, if you're working with the same application as me, you should be in this one, the SPA React _ React _ JavaScript _ hello world. That's where you should be. It's going to be different if you're using a different application, but if you're following along with me, you want to make sure this is the file you're under, the folder you're under, and then run npm install, and then run npm run start. What do you mean by URL? Pranav ko kate 121. Yeah, there was the repo that we're working with. I put someone on the MLH side put in the chat for you could just copy and paste that whole command and run that. Yes, thank you. Okay, cool. So I'm going to keep moving now. Where were we? Yes. So again, just to recap, we have so far installed our dependencies in our application. This is if you're working with the same one as me. And then we ran npm run start to start our development server and also take a look at what the code looks like in the browser. This is what it looks like if you're working with the same thing as me. And then you're going to go to your application settings. I had to kind of like censor this a little bit because there's some important information at the top that I cannot reveal publicly, which we'll get into in a second. But if you scroll down a little bit in your application settings, you will see application URIs over here. And then the specific fields we're filling in are allowed callback URLs, allowed logout URLs, and allowed web origins. And we're putting the same localhost for 4040 in all of these. Okay. All righty. So let's go back to our slides. Cool. So going back to our going back to our text editor, we're going to create a .m file. And this is where we're going to put some our client ID and our domain as well. So I'm going to show you guys a screenshot for this because again, this is the sensitive information that I was trying not to reveal earlier because this should not be public. So this is something you should not share. So I'm just going to show you a screenshot that is in one of our really long tutorials, but I'm showing this here because it is a screenshot that blurs out the specifics of it all. So I'll just blow this up a little bit more. So if you go to your application settings again, if you should probably still be there if you're following along. Right here is the domain and the client ID. These are things you don't want anyone else but yourself to see. And we're going to store these in environment variables. And this is why, because we only want ourselves to be able to see these things, but it's also important that we have this information when we are setting up the integration between the Auth0 API or SDK and our application. So you're going to take your domain and your client ID, and we're going to create a .m file. So I think I've already created one. Let's see. Yeah, I have. So just do touch.env and then do that in the root of your folder. And then here's where we're going to create our client ID and domain environment variables. So let me check the chat just to make sure we're all doing okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is a public repo, so everyone should have access to it. All right, so the syntax for environment variables is specific. It's going to be all caps, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do React _app _auth0 and then _domain. And then equals and no parentheses or anything. You're going to paste the domain from your application settings here. And then you're going to do the same thing for your client ID. And I'll just backspace here and do client _ID equals. Okay. Oops. And again, I'm not showing because I cannot publicly reveal this information, especially if we were in a Zoom call, maybe. But since we're public on YouTube and Twitch, I don't want to share this. So these are the credentials we need to have in order to be able to do our thing with Auth0. So you guys are also going to install the Auth0 SDK, the React one. So I'm going to put this in the chat so you guys can just copy and paste this really quickly. npm install. I wish I could copy and paste it directly from the slide, but I can't. At auth0 /auth0 -react. And for a quick second, I'm going to pause sharing my screen. Just for a second, so that I can put my client ID information in here without showing you guys my client ID and domain, because I'm going to need that too if I'm doing this along with you guys. And then this one here. Okay, I'm going to save it. And then I'll put it here, and then I'm going to put this back up onto the stage so you guys can see it again. I don't know how to do this actually. Thank you. Okie dokie. So in the .n file, that's where you're putting your environment variables for your client ID. Ooh, you guys almost saw that. For your client ID and for your domain. I will paste into the chat the syntax for doing your ID, your environment variables. So this is the one you'll use for the domain. I'll paste this in, and this is the one you'll use for your client ID. And you're just going to set those equal to the domain that's defined in your settings and the client ID that's also defined in your settings. And again, remember that you don't need quotations, and also you don't want to share this with anybody ever. because that makes it not so secure. Yeah, of course. Alrighty. So, like I said, you should have installed the Auth0 React SDK. And I will do that now. This should be quick and easy. This is just a simple installation. And if you don't have any errors, you should be good to go. And so once we have that done, we can move on to the next step. And we're going to add the Auth0 provider with our domain and client and redirect URI as props. So that's a lot. That doesn't make any sense without actually seeing it in the code. So let me show you guys in the code. So I'm going to put this away and I'm going to go to index.js. Okay. And we are going to start off by importing the Auth0 provider from Auth0 provider. And it should fill in if you're using VS Code like I am. But if not, it's just Auth0 provider from the Auth0/Auth0 React SDK. And once you have that imported, we are going to create constants or variables that will hold our client ID and domain. So I'll do domain equals, and this is the syntax for using our environment variables, process.env dot, and then we'll include the actual name of the environment variable. So for us, that is React _ app _ auth0 _ domain. Okay. And then we'll do the same for our client ID. So const client ID equals process.env dot react. And remember, this is in all caps, app auth0 _ client _ ID. And so now we're going to move on to this component here. We are going to wrap our application component, which encompasses the whole app, in our Auth0 provider component that we just imported, because this gives us access to Auth0 authentication throughout the whole application. So we're going to take Auth0 provider, and we're going to place app in there. So I'm going to just copy this. Tab. Oops. Ooh. Okay. And so with this being in place now, we're not completely done just yet, because we do have to specify the domain and client ID, which is why we added these variables here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add these as properties to Auth0 provider. So we're going to say domain equals curly braces domain. Did I spell that right? I did. Okay, good. And then we're also going to do client ID equals curly braces client ID. And then the last one we're adding is this one called authorization params. Okay. And we're going to add another curly braces in here. And we're going to just do this. This is all the indentation I'm doing is just for readability of the code. So we'll do redirect URI window location origin. And as a reminder, this code will also be in the guide that I referenced earlier. Let me leave a link to that in the chat just so you guys can have that as a reference throughout. I'll paste that here. Okie dokie. Alrighty. So, believe it or not, we've gotten a lot done so far, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So this kind of speed runs us into being able to actually use Auth0 for login and logout. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a login button component and create this in the component folder. Again, this is for specifically if you are using the same code as me. For the most part, anyway, if you're creating a React application, you're going to have your components in a component folder anyway. So we're just going to create a new file and call this login button.js. And in here, we will just import React. We'll also import the use auth0 hook from auth0, the React SDK. And then we're going to just export default function, which is what you do normally for React components that you want to use elsewhere. And we'll call this, almost forgot function, we'll call this login button. Curly braces. So I'll pause here. And again, remember, you can reference that guide. Did I leave that in the chat? I hope I did. I did. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So pausing there for a second just to make sure everyone's caught up. And moving on. So up here, we're going to declare a constant variable, and we're going to set this equal to a method that's within the use auth0 hook called login with redirect. I have to make sure I spell this correctly. I'm dyslexic, so sometimes spelling is very hard. And then we'll set this equal to use auth0 and make sure to not forget the parentheses because this is a function that we're grabbing. Okay. And so with that done, we're just going to return a button. And this button will have an on-click event. On-click. That will call this function from the Auth0 SDK. When it's clicked, and it'll say log in with redirect. And again, don't forget the parentheses. I have to remind you guys because I always forget parentheses, and then I'm upset about my code not working. And so we'll do login. Oops. So we have just created our login button. Okay. I forgot the 0 here. I'm glad I noticed that because our code would not have worked otherwise. So we have this component built out and hopefully it works. We've added our client ID and domain that connects us to our Auth0 instance. We've also been using the Auth0 SDK specifically with this use Auth0 hook, grabbing specifically the login with redirect function, which allows us to log our users in. So before we can even use this, let me go back to my slides to make sure I'm on track. I'm also going to check comments. Okay, seems like we're good to go. Moving on, that's what we just did. And we're going to add our login button to the navigation. So we want to test out our code by taking the component and putting it in our navigation to see if it works. So again, if you're using the same one as the same project as me, we're going to go up top in desktop. So we're going to go under components, there's navigation, and then there's desktop. Again, this project is very robust, but just focus on navbar here. And what we're going to do is we're going to import login button here. And then we're going to add this here, right under here. Say login button in our navigation. So I'm going to say save. Okay. And then if we go back to is this about to show my client ID? It's about to show my client ID. I forgot to navigate away from that. I'm going to pause sharing my screen for a quick second. Sorry, guys. I just have to be super careful. Okay. So yes, I'm going to add this back to the stage. Oops, I'm clicking the wrong thing. Could someone from the MLH side add my screen back to the stage, please? Thank you. Okay, so if we go looking at our code on localhost 440, because our server is still running, we will see here the login button. And let me just let me just check. It really depends. I have personally never used Firebase before. I'm addressing the comment from D_paranoid. Can you compare and contrast Auth0 and Firebase for authentication? So I've personally never used Firebase before. It may be pricing. It's something that you have to check out for yourself. I know personally for Auth0, one of the things that makes us really special is that we have SDKs available in a bunch of different languages, and we also provide authorization in addition to authentication. I have played around before with other auth providers, but not specifically with Firebase. I wish I could give you some more pointers there, but if you look into it and come up with some things, please let me know. Like I said, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter as well, and I'll look into it too. Okay. So let's try out our login button. I really hope this works. Oops. There is a typo in undefined. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay, let's see. Let's go back to our code and see what's going on. I'm going to look at the, again, I don't see anything here. But I'm going to kill the server really quick, fast and start it up again, see what happens. I did see some things come up for a second there. Compiled successfully. Then why isn't it working? Callback URL mismatch. Let me take a look at my settings really quickly and my application details. I'm gonna like scroll past that really fast. Let's see, this might help. Let's see. And if I go to 4040, does that work? It doesn't work. The provider redirect URL is not listed. Let me make sure I'm doing this correctly really quickly. I'm going to look at I'll go back to index.js. I'm going to make sure I just typed everything correctly. Window.location. I'm not sure why that's not working then. Looking at my application details again. Everything should be working the way that it's working. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's not working. Let me make sure I also have the correct domain and client ID. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm sorry to keep having to go back and forth like this. I just want to take a look at some things. And if this isn't working, I have a backup so that I can just demo from there. Let me make sure that I have the right things, the right application details with the client ID. Yes, I do. Those are correct. Those are correct. So what I'm going to do really quickly, just so that we don't get caught up on time, I'm going to take a look at my backup code. And I'm going to npm run start here. Okay, does this work? Oh, that's not working either. What's going on, guys? Sorry about this. When I tried it earlier, it was working. Oh, I hate when this happens. Okay, I'm going to take a look at my application, and I'm going to go down to here and save changes. Because it was definitely working earlier. I don't know why it's not now. Hold on. Control C. Okay, yeah. Okay. I'll show you what's supposed to show up on my backup code. Okay. Alrighty. So screen sharing again. If we press login here, This is what you're supposed to see. The login box provided by Auth0, where users can log in and log out. Okay. I don't know why the code earlier wasn't working. Thank you, Snowy Cab. Okay. Maybe that is what it is. You're right. Thank you, Spaghetti. I don't know how to say your username. You're totally right. God bless you. Okay. Going back to our code. Actually going back to our slides. Where are the slides at? Where I put the slides? Okay, here they are. All right. Oh, it's definitely supposed to be HTTP. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna go back to our other code, the original code. And we're going to go and create our log out button. But first, let me just go back here and I'm going to switch back to my other tenant because that's definitely what the problem was. I'm just going to scroll past that really fast so nobody sees. What? Is this the right application? It should be this one. Why are they not even in here? What's going on? Hold on. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. It should be this one. Okay. Alrighty. Yeah, I'm going to change these to HTTP now. How silly of me. Okay, I'm going to save changes. All right, perfect. Alrighty, going back to our slides. We have 2 minutes left to create our log out button. Okay, so we're going to create our logout. There was so much more I had planned for you guys. Oh my gosh. Good thing is we're having a workshop tomorrow. And initially I was just going to do a Q&A tomorrow because I thought this wouldn't last over 2 hours, but it seems like we'll be doing a part 2. So let me just check the chat really fast. Okay. Sorry, I just had to check the chat. So I'm going to quickly create in our component folders again, just like we did with the login button, a logout button. New file, and we'll call this logout button.js. And we're going to do the same thing of importing. Import React, and we'll also import use auth0 from auth0. Okay, cool. Alrighty. So we're gonna do the export default function. Hopefully I'll be able to finish this before my time runs out. Log out button. And then we're going to grab the from the use auth0 hook, we're grabbing specifically the log out method. Okay, and so then we'll reference use auth0. Don't forget your parentheses. And then we're going to return again a button. This time we'll have some added syntax because we're dealing with logout specifically, which is a little different. It's a few extra things compared to login with redirect. So we're going to add some parameters. So we're going to do log out. Oops. Okay. Params and add another curly brace. This is where it gets kind of complicated. So I'm going to actually copy and paste this into the chat so that you guys can just, instead of having to worry about getting the syntax wrong, I'll paste that here. Okie dokie. But I'll type it out. I try usually to actually type things out because it gets that like muscle memory going when it comes to coding. Return capital 2, and then we'll do window.location, which we've done before, .origin. Okay. And now we're going to close off this button and say log out. Okay. So our logout button is completed. Now, we don't have a ton of time. So let me see what's going on in the comments. Oh gosh, I feel like that's torture making someone only code in Vim. But anyway, so the next thing we're going to move on to, which I do want to try to cover really quickly. I'll try to do this within the next like 5 minutes. Is a little bit of extra logic, because remember, like right now in the in our navigation, we only have the logout button. I mean, we only have the login button. And even if we try to render the logout button, it would just show up next to the login button. And we don't want that. We want it to show either or, depending on whether or not the person is logged in. And we can do that because the use auth0 hook has a method that tells us whether or not someone is logged in. So we're going to import that. Well, first we'll import logout button. And then really quickly, I'm going to take a sip of my juice because my mouth is getting dry again. Okay. And then I'm going to import use auth0 again. Okay. And then up here above the return statement, we're going to declare a constant. And we're going to call this, it's not really declaring a constant. It's just calling the method from use auth0. So we're going to call this time is authenticated. Cap blocks authenticated. And we're going to set that equal to use auth0. And again, that gives us access to this property that tells us whether or not the person is logged in or logged out. And so we're going to add some logic. I'm going to actually delete a couple things. I'm going to delete navbar buttons because we don't need that. What you could have done is you could have put this logic in the navbar buttons file, but I don't really see the point in doing that. So I'm just going to delete that for now. And then here, we're going to add some curly braces because this is HTML, but we're adding a little bit of like JavaScript code in here. So we're going to say is authenticated. If the person isn't authenticated, so we're going to add an exclamation point up here. If they are not authenticated, we want to show them the login button specifically. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to add these two fragment tags here. So these ones. And then in between them, tab log in. So if the person is not authenticated, if they are not logged in, show them the login button. If they are authenticated, then, which means this would return true. If this returns true, we also want to show the log out button. I'm going to add those two fragments. Oops. And then tab here. Oh, tab. There we go. And then we're going to just do log out button. Okay. I'm going to save this. Is our thing still running? It's not still running. Our server is not still running. So I'm going to kill this one and run the server again. npm run start. Okay. It keeps showing in the wrong browser window. Stop doing that. Okay. I'm going to refresh this to make sure it's showing us the right thing. So we log in. Please work. Oh, yay. It worked. It worked this time. I'll continue with Google. I'll say, see, that was authorization. Actually, I lied a little bit earlier. We do have a little bit of authorization happening here. But as you can see, let me zoom in again. Hold on. At the top, this is our log out button. Also, it's very ugly right now because we're focused on the functionality of it. But I totally encourage you after this to make the login button look actually cute. If you know anything about React, you should be able to do that easily. So we logged out just now. So we know our logout button works. And if we log in, we also know now that the little logic that we added works as well because it shows us the logout button conditionally. But yes, that is it for right now. I'm going to have to end things here. I had more I wanted to show you, but again, like I said, I have another workshop slot tomorrow where I will be able to continue this on. We will go on to create So we did the login button, we did the logout button. We'll also be able to create a profile page where people can only access it when they are logged in. And then we'll also customize our log out and log in page so that it looks the way we want it to, instead of it being like the default generic Auth0. Okay, guys, thanks so much for attending. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to squeeze everything into my hour slot. But yes, I also want to give a quick shout out to the channel in Discord, ask-auth0. I will probably be posting the slides there as well, so you guys can look at them. I also shared I'll share all the links that I shared here as well in Discord, so you guys will have access to those as well. I'm going to take a quick look at any questions really quickly. Okay, perfect. Yay. Okay, awesome. So yeah, I'll make sure to share all those things. And someone just said that it's already in the Auth0 channel. But yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for listening to me ramble on. And I will see you all tomorrow as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Sierra, for this great workshop. It was very informative and a great one to follow along with. So yeah, as you mentioned, folks will be able to go back and rewatch this live stream. And we're so excited for you to come back and continue this workshop tomorrow. Also, if folks have questions, be sure to check out the Auth0 channel in the MLH Discord. And as for what's happening next, Alberto will be going over using GitHub Copilot. So stick around for making better hacks faster with GitHub Copilot. Thanks, and ciao for me from now.
See you guys.
Bye.